you guys for waiting. I know this has been a hopefully very interesting day. It's a little bit of a long day. But thankfully, we get to talk about something that I find quite a bit interesting. I hope everyone here finds interesting as well, which is what do we do with the extent of cannabis waste that we have been producing through packaging, right? What I laugh about is one of the only benefits of the black market is that when it came to packaging, it was relatively minimal, which although has its problems for consumers, not any information was portrayed on that packaging. No real information, consumer information and values provided on that packaging. There's no child resistance to that packaging, but there's not all much plastic in a small little plastic diamond bag. Now that we've transitioned to a fully legal market, comes with all of the benefits and drawbacks of regulation. Many of those benefits come in the form of better consumer information, better consumer protections. Principally, one of the most important things is child resistancy, ensuring things like edible products are not, able to be accessed by very young children because when eaten, they can be pretty dangerous for a little kid. But of course, the dangers there come with, well, now you've got a lot of chunky plastic that you're putting your cannabis in. Back in the day, I remember walking around, parking lots, and every now and then you see a little tiny bit of plastic that you think was a diamond bag. But I walk through Target nowadays and I see shattered cannabis containers with plastic shards everywhere, and the quantity of that plastic is just significantly larger. Child resistancy and the packaging that it comes with is not always all that friendly from a brand perspective of putting your labels on there and showing them in the store as kind of attractive packaging. So oftentimes people double, triple layer their packaging. You can see and you buy some cannabis products and you'll see a nice box with a label on it. You'll open that up and inside will be a pop-top container that's child resistant, and you pop open that pop-top container, and you open it up, there's another small container in there with your concentrate. This is a product valued probably about $30, $40 that is really only maybe the size of a dime, and yet the amount of plastic and cardboard that is used to package that product is really just not sustainable at all. So here we're going to talk about not only the current issues of packaging, the reasons why we have such complicated packaging regulations, but also really the solutions to those packagings, whether or not it comes in the form of more recyclable, more sustainable packaging designs, and really where we need to move to as far as an industry and as far as industry regulations to ensure that we're producing products in a product packaging that is going to fit our ideals as an industry at large. So I've got three esteemed panelists. First, we've got Chloe Grossman, who's Deputy Director of the Council on Responsible Cannabis Regulation. Chloe and I have worked together for probably about a year and a half, 2 years or so now, and is really one of the experts in packaging and labeling policy in the US. We also have Ron. Can you pronounce your last name? Bassick Smith, thank you. Who's a co-founder of Sana Packaging. And we have Barbara Diner, who's a managing partner at Higher Standards Packaging. So thank you guys all so much. And first, I'll let Chloe take the stage.
So I'm Chloe Grossman, Deputy Director of the Council on Responsible Cannabis Regulation. I also work at Vicente Cederberg with Andrew. So as he mentioned, we have a packaging problem, which is that with the expansion of legal cannabis, we're also having an accumulation of packaging, and that's especially when there is multi-layer packaging, such as an exit bag plus a product package plus a barrier that protects the actual product. And then also to add to that issue, we have packaging that's used in shipping products and people repackaging products at the point of sale in order to accommodate a sales label, etc. So Andrew and I embarked on a 16-month journey where we developed packaging and labeling standards as part of a multidisciplinary committee that had representation from all over the United States, cannabis industry folks, people who were not at all involved in the cannabis industry. So we kind of came up with a list of issues and some model policies. So using that experience and also my experience in policy generally, I'm going to try to provide some insight on differences and similarities in state cannabis packaging laws and regulations and industry positions on changes to the existing policies. So one of the major contributors to the packaging problem is actually cannabis policy. So child-resistant packaging is nearly always required, and one of the biggest issues, in my opinion, is that it's often required for all cannabis product types. So for those of you who aren't as familiar with cannabis products, there are activated products and then there are products that are non-activated. Products that are non-activated, for example, flour is the perfect example. You have to actually apply heat to it to activate it and make it psychoactive. So to place non-activated products in child-resistant packaging makes absolutely zero sense, because if a child can gain access to it, they won't get high. Nothing will happen other than possibly having a stomachache or having an unpleasant experience with having cannabis in your mouth. The same thing goes for certain concentrates, which are also non-activated, immature plants and seeds, and perhaps topicals. Some topicals do have activated cannabis or cannabinoids in them, but if we look to what's required for cosmetics, child-resistant packaging is not required for them. So should we hold cannabis to a higher standard? That's a question that perhaps we should explore together later. Another issue with child-resistant packaging being mandatory in almost all states for all products is that it greatly limits material selection because of the child-resistant packaging standards. So that the material selection is limited both in terms of the packaging material itself, but also the container closures or caps. Those often are made out of non-recyclable plastics, etc. Another big way that policy contributes to the packaging problem is it helps perpetuate excess packaging by creating multiple points at which you have to label a product, and also just having excessive labeling in general. So I'm sure you guys are all aware that the list of things that you have to have on a cannabis product label is very, very long, and it exceeds any other product that is psychoactive and used either for medical or recreational purposes, with the exception of some pharmaceutical products, since they have to have lots and lots of information in that separate panel that they provide to you. But policy can also be part of the solution here. So we're seeing some positive developments in terms of a shift in states being not just permissive by being silent about having business operators do take-back programs, allowing the use of the reuse of exit packages and whatnot by consumers. So we're seeing states actually start to say explicitly in law or in regulation that those types of practices are allowed. And though that may not seem like a substantial shift to some people, it really does encourage those practices. It can bring it to mind for people who weren't aware that that was an option, and knowing explicitly that the state allows it makes a lot of people more comfortable. Also, this was included in the Oregon regulations. There is a provision stating that nothing in the regulations prohibits the reuse of packaging by a consumer. And it references, some regulations that are supposed to pertain to the reuse of packages. I haven't seen those regulations yet, but that's an interesting area that we should look at policy development in. We've also seen some references to potential forthcoming policy on the same matter in California. As you may be aware, California is about to release their emergency regulations, and as a very progressive state in a lot of areas, I think we can expect some more progressive policies there as well. So the other contributing factor, I think, is actually industry attitudes. So in the study that Andrew and I did together, we actually asked some questions about industry operators' perspectives on packaging recycling and reuse by the same consumer or reuse by a different consumer if the product was, or if the package was sanitized in accordance with regulations that the state would have to set. And we found that people were very angry that we even brought these ideas up. Like I personally got an email saying, I question your professionalism for even asking this question. So I was frankly kind of shocked that people would be so opposed to even asking a question about recycling and reuse of cannabis product packaging. So it kind of made me wonder, what is that about? And it's possible that this data was outdated and people really are shifting. We did the survey part of our study in 2015, but I kind of doubt it. I would suspect that there's still going to be some resistance. So the two other ideas that we had were it could be a fear reaction due to the significant financial investment that cannabis companies have to make in packaging. They may be afraid that the packaging regulations are going to change yet again and make yet another huge investment in packaging. And another option that could potentially explain this is the fact that we found throughout our survey results that people tended to prefer whatever the policy was in their state of operation, which was really interesting because you would think people would be more critical of the regulations that they're subject to, but we actually found the opposite. So it may be the type of thing where we just need a few states to take the leap, and then people will start to get used to the idea. One other interesting survey finding, we did ask some questions about how members of industry would feel about eliminating child-resistant packaging for certain product types. And interestingly, we weren't able to get majority support for eliminating child-resistant packaging for any of the product types. So again, it kind of goes back to a potential maintain the status quo effect. However, we did find that when we eliminated all of the ancillary folks from our data set, a lot of which were actually packaging manufacturers, we were able to get majority support for eliminating certain types of CRP. So the two main types of products that people were supportive of eliminating CRP were flour and then also non-edible infused products, so basically topicals, and we didn't break it down this far, but potentially transdermals as well, though I think we'd have to do some more follow-up analysis to really see how people feel about that one. So we can talk a little bit later about what we can do, but I just wanted to touch on a few possible developments for cannabis packaging in the future. So with really progressive places like California and Canada coming online, and developments in the cannabis market and internationally as well, I think we're likely to see a lot more innovation in child-resistant packaging, hopefully in terms of new materials, new designs, and I think that this is because child-resistant packaging was typically purchased by pharmaceutical companies. So now we have this new industry with a lot of people who, are tied to the earth and believe in preserving the environment. So I think that we collectively can push things forward in terms of child-resistant packaging. Another thing that I think may be coming down the pipeline is the actual use of cannabis waste in the manufacturing of cannabis product packaging. So this is actually not the case in Colorado, but in most states that allow cannabis and comprehensively regulate the market, the definition of cannabis specifically exempts mature cannabis stocks. So that has implications for how you handle the waste. If the stock is exempted and there's not a separate definition for waste, then the stock is not considered cannabis waste, and it doesn't need to be ground and incorporated like other cannabis wastes. So it could potentially be sold to a third party or given to a third party who can then create different types of paper materials, et cetera, from those cannabis stalk fibers. This is actually already being done in California, but I would say it's not perfect yet. The prototypes I've seen are a little bit flimsy, and they tend to be more like an actual paper rather than something that would fully protect the product. But, and I also think the utility may be kind of minimal, especially if CRP continues to be the status quo, just because of the child-resistant packaging standards. I'm not sure that a product that's created from cannabis stalks could fit the bill. But I'm also not the expert on cannabis product manufacturing, so I'll let my colleagues here speak to that.
Thanks everyone for coming out here. Really excited to see sustainability finally taking a hold in this industry. So my name is Ron. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Sana Packaging, and what we do is we make hemp-based packaging solutions for the cannabis industry. So you might ask why am I focusing on cannabis packaging, and also why am I using hemp to make that packaging? And so when you look at the cannabis industry as it is today, we see a lot of focus on the cultivation side of things and very little, from water efficiency to energy efficiency. But unfortunately, not much has been put in the distribution and retail sides of things. So from the materials used for packaging, and then the waste that's created from that packaging. And so, today, as it stands, almost all of the plastic used in the cannabis industry is from petroleum-based plastics. This petroleum is hard to extract and dangerous to extract. We're continually producing more carbon dioxide. The plastics that we're currently using do not biodegrade, and those plastics are destroying our oceans and our environment. Just recently, I heard a statistic that by 2050, scientists are predicting that the total mass of plastic material in the ocean will outweigh that total mass of fish in the ocean. Serious issue. And so then the next question is, what about recycling? And unfortunately, it's just really not working. Currently, we're discarding around 23 million tons of plastic a year. 6% of this plastic actually ends up being repurposed. And really what we're doing is just continuing to enable the fossil fuel industry. So in looking at the cannabis industry as it stands today, by 2020, we're predicting that there's going to be at least a billion units of single-use packaging waste being created year in and year out. And that plastic isn't going anywhere. But we believe by creating better packaging, we can start creating a better cannabis industry. So that brings us to the question of why are we still using these petroleum-based plastics for single-use items specifically? And the true answer is I really don't have a great answer for you. But we are working as hard as we can to try to change that. So with that, we believe that we can do better. The cannabis industry is young. It's open to change. Before we start looking like many other resource-intensive industries like tobacco and alcohol, we can, the people in this room can help make a difference there. And so then why hemp, and why do we believe that that is the best means to make sustainable packaging for the cannabis industry? First and foremost, as of 2014 in the Farm Bill, we can grow it domestically in states that are under that pilot program. And then from a sustainable standpoint, hemp, we know that it uses less water and pesticides than almost any other industrial crop that we know of. It actually absorbs carbon dioxide while growing. And then most importantly, hemp is biodegradable. And it's also family, so there's no reason why we shouldn't be packaging cannabis in hemp. So to do this, we're using hemp plastic to make a variety of cannabis packaging items. So to look at these, we have a pre-roll container, concentrate container, flower container, so trying to focus on kind of the three main packaging items out there. Pre-rolls are kind of an easy option for us. One, there's a ton of volume of them moving, but also they create the most plastic waste per volume of cannabis being moved. Concentrate container, what we're doing here, we're using recycled glass and then replacing the screw top with the plastic screw top with our hemp plastic. Pretty simple transition for that. And then our flower container. This is something that we think is really a game changer for the industry for several reasons. One being, as we talked about, compliance and labeling. It's got flat sides on it, so you can actually read what's being put on there. And then also from a branding standpoint, we believe it's an evolution in that side of the industry as well. And then, so the next thing that we think about is sustainability from more so not just the materials used, but how those materials, their efficiency. So we've made our products, they nest inside of each other. So from a shipping and storage standpoint, they're a great improvement over, your traditional containers that are out there. And we're super excited. We've been working on this for the past year or so now, developing our plastic, coming up with a new design, and then making a design that's child resistant certified. So we now know that these samples work. We have them, a flower container that you see here, and then we also have pre-roll container samples as well. And that's a huge milestone for us, really, because it's proving that the design works, the plastic works, and lastly, we're now going through the child resistant certification process, so we hope within the next 2 weeks we're going to have a final answer. Things are going really well, that we have some of the first really differentiated child resistant packaging out there that's also made from a sustainable material. So going through this whole process of trying to create more sustainable packaging and using hemp, we've really come across that there's a lot of challenges that we still face with hemp. First and foremost, obviously, being federal prohibition. And really what this is doing is it's making the cost of hemp much more expensive than it would be if it wasn't federally legal. And then second with that, we are also battling against corn as the main material or crop that we're using to make bioplastics. And those are heavily subsidized. And so competing against that is another difficulty. And then lastly, obviously, where we stand with hemp today, it's very new, and the processing facilities that we need to make to get the materials that we need to turn them into plastics are just not at the scale to really move to have hemp plastics be applicable to industries outside of the cannabis industry. So with that being said, I think there's a lot of people here and folks in this room, industries, both the cannabis industry and the hemp industry are really at an important point in time because they have the ability to start creating some of these changes that we want to see in this industry and make it a stronger industry and make it happen.
Thank you so much, Ron. That's really awesome. I mean, I've always, we hear from a lot of the hemp people that you can use hemp to make essentially everything, and it'd just be so awesome to have cannabis sold to you in cannabis. If you could, drive to the cannabis store in your cannabis car, being fueled on cannabis fuel, and buy your cannabis in cannabis packaging, you could go home and take a good night's sleep on my cannabis bed and put my head on my cannabis pillow. Awesome. Thanks. So next we have Bart from Higher Standards Packaging.
Hi, thanks so much. It's great to see you guys all out here caring about a sustainable cannabis industry. This is our second year involved with the program, and it's just great for the heart to know that you guys care. So, Chloe, you did such a great job talking about the challenges of packaging and the overregulation of packaging. And my business partner and I started a packaging company specifically for the cannabis industry pretty much here in Colorado in 2014, early on in 2014. when there was quite a shortage of child-resistant packaging. We learned early on, boy, child-resistant packaging is primarily manufactured of virgin plastic resin. And it's kind of hard for a couple of older women to wrap their head around the fact that they came out of retirement to litter the planet. So we go through a big struggle with that. But we did launch our company. We launched our company with a line of straight-sided jars that we work with a manufacturing partner out of California with. And it's a pharmaceutical style jar, but it did some great things for what the industry wanted in that it was easy to label through with a labeling machine if they were doing machine labeling. It had plenty of real estate, and it had a really wide mouth that beautifully showcases buds and are easy for you to get into to get your edibles out. So this style of jar was very successful for us. We also represent other packaging, but this was our flagship. We had the good fortune very early on in meeting with the good folks from Terrapin Care Station up in Boulder. And Terrapin found that this line of jars was perfect for what they were looking for. They were doing machine labeling, they liked the wide mouths, and they started ordering the packaging from us. That being said, I want to clarify that Terrapin is an exception to the rule. Number one, they have storage space and warehouse space. Number two, they order quarterly at a time for packaging, and they had that capital available to them. So in 2014, I think they started out with 6 different sizes of this stuff that went from everything from packaging ounces, and this was a flour solution that packaged everything from flour all the way down to eighths. And they loved the packaging, but about 4 months into it, and just prior to getting their licenses in Aurora, they realized they were putting a lot of plastic into the universe, and they are a very environmentally conscious organization. So their packaging manager and their executive team tasked us to find a more eco-friendly packaging solution. And we looked and looked and looked, and my business partner, Deb Baker, did extensive amount of research on how can we make this a more eco-friendly. And sure enough, we learned about post-consumer resin, or PCR for short. There are solutions, and if you get creative, you can find solutions to the pure virgin polypropylene problem that exists out there. And you can ask people to be more creative, and you can ask manufacturers to be more creative. And I think as an industry, the packaging industry is set on fire with this. There was a trade show in Vegas about a month ago, and the big news out of that show was cannabis packaging opportunities. So what we learned is if you talk to some of these manufacturers, they're willing to try to do what they need to do to accommodate this industry that's blowing up. So what we learned about was PCR, which is the proper term for 100% recycled plastics. And post-consumer resin is available in HDPE plastic, PET, and pure polypropylene. So those plastics can be recycled. After they're sorted, the plastic sorted, checked, and recycled, the recycled plastic can take on a whole new life in new containers. Packaging products in containers made from PCR is an efficient way to make your cannabis business more sustainable, environmentally responsible, and green. So how it works is you get your water bottle or your cannabis package from the manufacturer makes it. It's sent on to the companies that package the products, then to us who consume it, then to us who discard it, back to the trash people that collect it, and then it goes into recycling where the appropriate plastic that's been deemed suitable is ground, washed, dried, and pelletized, and then sold back to manufacturers to make new containers. The environmental benefits of using PCR products is that it helps you maintain or meet your sustainability goals, and if you're a MIP or a manufacturer, it helps your retailers make those sustainability goals as well. A great and exciting piece that we really found about PCR is we learned that plastic made from PCR reduce energy consumption by up to 90% during the manufacturing process. So that takes a lot of pressure off the carbon footprint. PCR products use up to 75% less CO2 to produce than virgin HDPE and up to 90% on PET and polypropylene. PCR products meet tough sustainability measures. So in everyone that's judging sustainability, PCR products stand up and meet the task. The way you can let your customers know, and whether you be a wholesale manufacturer or whether you're a retailer, is by letting your message be known on your label that you're using a recycled plastic, that it's there. I know Terrapin was really proud to do that on their label as one of the first ones to roll out the R2 jar that we'll talk about in a second. PCR containers are a great option to aid in the reduction of waste and help reuse plastic containers that are being used on a daily basis. So they're out there anyway, and I think you made a really good point that there's not enough recycling going on, but at least we're taking something recycled and using it in our industry, and we can be proud of that. So higher standard packaging with our Muse Terrapin Care Station rolled out the R2 jar. We went to our manufacturer and basically asked him, he was running these jars in pure polypropylene, will you just try this PCR resin in your current molds? Just try it, see if it works. And sure enough, they did. So we were able to go back to Terrapin and present this and say, okay, now you have a jar that's recycled and it's recyclable again. So they took the bait, and in September of 2014, we rolled out with the products. The nice thing about these is they're available in a lot of different sizes. We have a teeny tiny jar for that's 1/8 of an ounce that has accommodated concentrates. They're available in custom colors if you're interested. And the jar, we have a jar that goes all the way up to an 8-ounce jar, which if you don't have too big a flower, it can accommodate an ounce or a 1/2 ounce perfectly. So why should you guys consider using post-consumer resin, be it our R2 jar or anybody else, for your cannabis packaging? The great news is for edibles manufacturing, the post-consumer resin we're using, which is recycled milk jug plastic, has been approved for food contact applications, and the HDPE resins that have previously been used. Our R2 jars meet the standards for packaging food, as well as supplements and herbal medicines. And the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has issued a no objection letter for post-consumer recycled PCR products. And why that's important is that they're just basically saying that this resin is deemed as appropriate as any virgin resins for packaging. R2 jars are manufactured using a really nice sustainable technology as well. Made primarily from curbside collected food packaging, so we can all feel good about that. It's cleaned by a proprietary process that utilizes heat and air without harmful chemicals. So if you're putting, especially flour, into a jar, all plastic, no matter what it is, leaches a little bit. So if you're going to leach something, if it's going to leach into your beautiful flour, we want it to not be free. We want it to be free of chemicals and non-harmful to lungs at the end of the day. Recycled plastic is melted and formed into the final pellets that are used in manufacturing our higher standard R2 jars. And the R2 recycled jars can be recycled up to 7 times. So this baby can go back in the recycling stream again, be made into another jar, and into the recycling stream again up to 7 times. And again, they're available in a wide variety of sizes, and we are really happy to announce, and I wish I had samples to show, but I'd have to make you all sign an NDA, and we don't have time for that today. But we are rolling out a new solution that will be able to utilize PCR recycled plastic that doesn't have the mushroom cap, that's not as pharmaceutical looking, and we'll be taking orders on those hopefully at the show in November or even in January, and it again will be, they'll be made of recycled plastics. So there are options out there, and you should ask, whether it be our jars or anybody else, whoever you're talking to, any vendor you're using, ask them if their products are available in post-consumer resin.
Thank you so much, Barb. I really appreciate it. So before I open it up to questions for the rest of the group, I'm going to ask a few initial questions. Before I do that, I also want to thank our session sponsor, WANA. their packaging is in little pop tops, but there's plastic inside. So hopefully one day in the future we can get to a point where we can have good edible product packaging without kind of double layer packaging. Which leads me to my first question. Why are so many cannabis products in multiple layers of different packaging, and how can we best create policy or packaging that will minimize and reduce the total cannabis consumer waste? Because of course, if you've got 3 layers of packaging, you've now created 3 packages to package one product.
I can take that. Yeah, I mean, I think, and I've been going out and talking to several different people, everyone in the industry, and really, why are you using this type of packaging? What is the reason behind it? And it comes down to 2 things. One is either regulations, or the other side is branding. And so that's a huge area that we're trying to focus on. And people say like real estate space. So like, how can I tell my story of my company on a small concentrate container this big? It's just, that's very difficult to do. And how can I put any regulations and labeling? So that comes down to that we need to design packaging that fits items specifically. Concentrate containers for concentrate, flower containers for flower, edible containers for edibles that get these messages across without having to use substitutes from, really we're using flower containers for concentrates and all these, crossovers that doesn't need to be done once we can start, innovating different types of packaging.
I would also say there's a lot of competition for shelf space in dispensaries. All of the manufacturers are trying to set themselves apart. Even dispensaries that are packaging their own flower are trying to wow the consumer with packaging. So they may have a pop-top jar inside a box because the box gives them so much real estate to do beautiful marketing work. But you're right, it's an issue, and it's just adding so much into the waste stream.
Yeah.
But you can't blame them for wanting to make their marketing and their brand marketing.
Yeah, no, you're right. It's one of those things that unless we can find a good pop-top box or some sort of child-resistant box. But then, of course, the downsides of large boxes is that it becomes a lot more complex to store that. And if you're a dispensary, and many of these dispensaries have relatively small square footages in order to, one, fit in economically into a city, and also because of the way 280E in the tax code impacts retail dispensaries. Most of them don't have large storage warehouses. So hopefully as we get our storage and warehouse license up and running in Colorado, we'll have a little bit easier time having dispensaries have larger storage for their products. But there's a combination of different issues essentially. I guess it's branding, it's child resistancy, and then it's also the storage of those products before they're ever sold. So we spoke quite a bit about child resistant products. What actually does child resistant mean? What are the kind of the requirements of that? Claire, you want to start off?
Sure. So child-resistant packaging is packaging that complies with certain provisions in the Poison Prevention Packaging Act. It's been in place for many decades. Essentially, it sets out standards for packaging that is difficult for a child under the age of 5 to open, but is easy enough for any normal adult to open, and also has to be senior friendly. So it goes through a series of tests that are also laid out in statute that establish that it meets those criteria. So it was put in place to protect children from toxic substances, which is a little bit ironic now that it's applied to cannabis, because we all know that cannabis is not toxic. But the other piece to child-resistant packaging is that it must meet third-party certification, or it must be certified by certain third-party bodies. So those are kind of the key concepts behind it. Some of the complications are, as we talked a little bit about this earlier, it limits the materials available, again, largely because CRP was produced generally to serve the pharmaceutical industry. And so we see a lot of, the more pill bottle type of products. And it can also encourage multi-layer packaging because of the limitations on the range of products that you have available to the range of packaging products that you have available. So like these two we're talking about, if you have a container that looks like everyone else's container, then what you often do is put that inside of a box or something else that you can then make pretty so that you can appeal to consumers on the shelf. So hopefully that will change a little bit over time as we see new products developing and see more innovation in CRP. But really CRP should not be required for all products, as I said earlier, and I will stand firm on that one.
Thanks, Chloe. Before we open up questions to the audience, I have one more. What are the most environmentally unfriendly forms of cannabis packaging the industry should avoid? If you're going to a dispensary and you see a certain type of package, which one should you say, you know what, I'm not going to choose this product, I'm going to choose another product because that product packaging is horrible for the earth?
Exit bags. The exit bags that you see are of a film that are not compatible into the recycling stream, so exit bags are terrible. Also, there are some dispensary groups that put mostly flour, I believe, into Mylar bags and then fill it with nitrous and get it out the door. The Mylar bag's not CR, so that's not, and those Mylar bags are not are not recyclable. And then they stick it in an exit bag, and about 90% of those exit bags, other than the cloth, there's one made of cloth, they're not recyclable either. So they are really, really hard on the environment.
Got it. Don't buy your bags.
Mylar exit bags.
Exit bags. Ron, you have any other thoughts?
I think there's also the other side of things, like from a quality of plastic standpoint too, even in like the pop tops and stuff. And I know from a lot of concentrated containers, they're using polystyrene and stuff for that, which has been shown to have some negative health effects. And so, yeah, just really knowing where the plastic's coming from. I think Barb nailed it on the head with a nice, clean sourced plastic, and knowing where that's coming from is incredibly important.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. So we've got 2 microphones here. If anyone has any questions, please come up. If not, I'll continue asking the panelists questions until we're done with time. Yeah, go for it. Can you come to the microphone? Yeah, so you can either, yeah, that might be for the recording. Thank you so much.
So, Barbara, this is for you. It's not working. You said your PCR is recyclable up to 7 times. Are you recycling? How is that getting back into the stream of you recycling it 7 times, or are you just throwing it back in the normal recycling bin?
I maybe didn't make that very clear. That plastic can be recycled up to 7 times. We are not recycling those same jars personally 7 times. But if it goes back into the recycling bin, it'll be clean enough to be recycled up to 7 times and used again for either possibly one of our jars or another jar that a responsible manufacturer is making.
So, the recycling, the act of recycling versus the packaging being recyclable or the packaging being from recycled plastics, I think we dive into the question of, okay, how can the cannabis industry be effective as a conduit for further recycling of their own packaging? One of the main things that would probably be a great benefit would be if you bring back your cannabis jars from that brand and you deposit it in a receptacle, you get, I don't know, 25 cents off, or you get a certain number of points that can be redeemed for a free joint. Some sort of additional sales tactic for encouraging consumer recycling. Now, of course, the reason that is not done in Colorado, you may think, well, it's cumbersome and the businesses don't want to deal with it, but actually, the reason it's not allowed is because you can't have any cannabis on the premises that cannot be sold. So a business can't allow people to bring in cannabis packaging that may still have remnants of cannabis in it. This is honestly a policy, this is a problem caused by bad policy, where people think that someone is going to rummage through hundreds of used cannabis jars in order to scrape out the remnants of kief and then consume it. Considering that on those premises cannabis is sold, and it's getting cheaper and cheaper, that to me seems like a fallacy created by people that are just fearful of cannabis at large. So maybe that's Chloe, something that you and I probably would agree that needs to change. Hopefully in other states we can see more recycling programs that you may be thinking about that would encourage consumers to bring their old packaging back rather than either throwing it in the garbage. I've definitely seen outside of dispensaries people just taking the cannabis, maybe if in a package, they just take it out and just throw it on the ground. Hopefully there's recycling bins outside so you can just toss it in those recycling bins. But that is a policy issue that we could also probably change to encourage packaging that is from recycled plastic to, again, be recycled. Anyone else have questions?
Can I add something?
Yeah, go for it, Clay.
So, beyond just having consumer involvement and retailer involvement, I think we could see more involvement and coordination all across the supply chain. So reuse by consumers, take back or buy back programs by retailers, also reuse by producers, provided that there's sufficient sanitation standards in place. But also, I'd like to see packaging manufacturers get involved in this as well. If it's possible to take back the products that have been used, sanitize them, and somehow reuse them in further packaging manufacturing, that would be really the ideal. So I think that may be somewhere that we'll be going in the future, but it's not quite happening in coordination at this point.
Thank you, Chloe.
I would add that there are, in some dispensaries, there are recycling receptacles in the lobbies.
Yeah.
And we encourage everybody to do that. And then they either take it to recycling. There's some services in Denver. There's one called Sustainability that actually employs mentally handicapped adults to help clean and sort the plastic.
Yeah.
It's a great company. I think for $30 a month, they'll come and pick up your plastic jars. They're working in the cannabis space. But just to encourage that, and they'll also go to grow houses and manufacturers. So if that's your, part of business, we really would encourage that, especially dispensaries, do put, at least for now, recycling bins in the lobbies. Because you can get it in the lobby, it just can't go into the dispensary.
Exactly, yeah. Just can't be on the list purpose.
So I have two questions. One would be, is the hemp plastic that you're creating, is that, can that be pelletized and then remolded?
Yeah. So the plastic that we're using, the goal with it that we've come about is using 100% plant-based plastic. It can be recycled. So yeah, we could go with these programs and take back the plastic. But really, the problem that we're trying to solve is human behavior and time. Even if we over time recycle 10% of our stuff or 100%, only 90% of it, we still have this microplastic issue that is continually being created. So the idea is that our plastic, when it does, 30% of all plastic ends up outside of a traditional waste stream. So that's like a major issue that we have to solve. And so that's what we see as using hemp plant-based plastic is that whatever happens to it, it ends up in your water system, in your bodies. It's not harmful material. So that's kind of the goal.
Okay. And then the other question I have for you is, I've noticed some other larger non-cannabis companies like L'Oreal or Garnier or something like that partnering with TerraCycle. And is that something that people, manufacturers, whether they're packaging or they're putting their items in packaging, do you see anyone pursuing initiatives like that where they're trying to partner with TerraCycle to divert these things from the waste stream and reuse them in some way?
Yeah, I mean, that's, our end goal is really to be sourcing the waste materials to turn it into the packaging, because really we're using the hemp hurd, the inner stalk, so a completely non-psychoactive part of the plant. So yeah, we'd love to move into that with the large enough brands and be like, hey, you're producing 300,000 units of plastic packaging waste, and you use a lot of plant material to make the product that you're putting in that plastic packaging waste. We can take that for you and turn it into plastic, because it really, what we're doing is we're just taking the hurd and grinding it down and infusing it with a corn-based plastic. So it can be done.
Thank you all for your commitment to diverting plastic out of our landfills and our earth. I'm really excited about bioplastics and hemp particularly. I'm just wondering about the facility-specific requirements for that recycling, if that's true. I know some bioplastics require that. If the hemp plastic also, and just some strategies around changing that human behavior that you spoke to.
Yeah, I mean, the human behavior one, I guess, is the one that really like jumps at me the most. And when you're talking about these, bringing products back, there's also just the nature of packaging, right? And how we interact with it. So, if you look outside to every other industry, packaging is an issue as well, and that's kind of, the issue at hand is that human behavior around packaging and just the physical nature of it and what it's supposed to do. It's hard to find some other reason for it. It's supposed to protect something that's not supposed to be exposed to air or, exposed to water. And so with that, it comes down to basically humans having to change their behavior around these things. So if we are going to have single-use plastic items and we want them to be recycled, then maybe we need like a little bag like attached to us at all times that makes sure we put something in there, and if we don't, we get like shocked or something. I don't know. Humans, like I've worked at places where we have the compost pile, the recycle pile, and the trash pile, and it's literally like 90% of the people you talk to, you have to like physically hold their hand to make them put it in there, and that's just the unfortunate thing. And that's like the general collective consciousness that we all need to work on, I think.
I think we could, though, engage in more education of consumers just regarding whether your packaging is recyclable or not. Instead of having just the recycling symbol on the bottom of your package, maybe incorporate that somewhere more visibly into your packaging design. Encourage consumers at the point of sale to either bring that container back or to recycle it. And also, I think that government could certainly get more involved with educating consumers about what types of materials can be recycled, what types of materials cannot be recycled. And I had one more thing, but it's gone, so.
I think you brought up a good point about people's awareness of what to do with it. And I think that's a huge issue in the industry, is that a lot of this stuff isn't labeled properly. What can be recycled, what is from quality plastic that can be recycled up to 7 times. And that just, when you go out in the industry, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't have a number on the bottom, and that just now is another issue. It's confusing to people, and how is someone supposed to get around that? I was talking to someone who's trying to develop a recycling program where each, everything's gonna be shaped a certain way and it'll only fit through that size receptacle hole. And that's a solution that I'm thinking about. Maybe it's a color or something, maybe every top has to be a certain color, but it's that type of plastic that can be recycled, because I think it's hard, it's confusing.
Yeah, and beyond just the type of material, sometimes you can get little concentrate containers that are made of a recyclable material, but the way that the recycling sorting process works out, those materials are too small and end up in the landfill anyway. So recycling your little tiny concentrate containers, they're still going to go to the landfill. So just making people aware of things like that, I think, can be incredibly effective.
I mean, the good news is that all the plastic, the pop tops, anything in polypropylene, PET, HDPE, that's all recyclable. So that's all good news. And if human behavior recycles those and puts them in the bins, or sorts their trash, or does whatever they have to do, that is recyclable. It's just, as an industry, taking it one step further and looking for those solutions, and especially getting away from those pesky bags, because those are just the bane of my existence. But just as an industry, where to kind of be on the forefront of that movement, because mayonnaise and food products, they're not touting that the jars are made of recycled plastic because it's food, and do their consumers really want to hear that? But cannabis tends to be a greener, more environmentally conscious consumer anyway. So it's a great way to create brand loyalty with those people.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions? Thanks.
I was wondering if you guys could speak a little bit, if you have any experiences working with clients in states like California or Michigan that haven't had a whole lot of regulation until very recently, and what those kinds of clients are experiencing as they're trying to get compliant with new regulations.
We are seeing a real uptick in calls from certainly California. And I think it's because with their proximity to the ocean, a lot of these pop tops are going to start showing up in the water. You can be guaranteed of it, especially when you get the pop rings and everything else. And that's going to be such a black eye on the industry. A lot of them have seen, we've enjoyed some nice media on our R2 jars. They've seen the media, they've called, and they're looking for eco-friendly solutions. So I would say California is, just the uptick in calls. But however, that being said, until the regulations go into effect and they're told they have to be in child-resistant packaging, which that hasn't really quite happened yet, they can still be sending marijuana out in Ziploc bags or paper bags or anything they want. And child-resistant packaging is more expensive than other packaging. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of them launch in child-resistant packaging until they absolutely have to. But they are being, we're getting a lot of calls, and there's certainly a lot of interest in learning about that, and they're asking for environmental solutions. I can't say they all are, but it's really heartwarming to see how many of them are interested.
Chloe, I know you do a lot of work with California businesses. What
I do.
What are your thoughts on where they're at with regards to not only just child-resistant packaging, but sustainable solutions for packaging?
I think there's a lot of interest. One of the great things about the California market is that in the absence of regulation, we've seen a lot of really cool, innovative packaging design coming out of California. That being said, everybody's kind of freaking out about the transition into child-resistant packaging. In California right now, there's also a lot of uncertainty about everything in the regulatory sphere. So it's just one of the many things that people are very worried about. But we did just have a client this week asking for a list of all of the manufacturers of sustainable child-resistant packaging. So that is definitely a hot button issue there. However, I have to temper that by saying that the California businesses that I've come into contact with are some of the most cost-sensitive businesses I've ever encountered. And I think that's because there is a lot of fear kind of going into a highly regulated market. So I think that businesses in California will probably be looking for some ideal of sustainable and also cost effective, and I don't know if we're quite there yet. So the development of a sustainable, cost effective, child resistant packaging solution I think will be really beneficial for the market and also for whoever's able to get there.
Well, California, their rents are going to be higher for their dispensary space. Their overhead is going to be a lot higher than what Colorado started at, what Colorado is getting close to. But when you just think about what happened with warehouse space in Denver, imagine what it's going to be outside LA or San Francisco or San Diego or any of the big markets there. So I can see why they're so cost sensitive.
Yeah, and the products are actually already priced pretty high in California, probably because of the overhead. So, I think cost is going to be a big driver of packaging in that market.
Chloe, do you know when the rules are going to go into effect in California? When do you think child-resistant packaging rules they'll say, time to pull the trigger? Do you know that?
When they'll go into effect? Well, technically on January 1st, but there's going to be a grace period. I believe it's 120 days.
Thanks, Chloe. Does anyone else, any other audience members have a question before I dive into the final question? Cool, let me dive into it. So we've talked about exit packaging being, an old solution to a temporary problem of lack of child resistancy for edible products. We've talked about recycling. We've talked about various of other aspects of new, post-consumer resin products. What do you guys think the future holds for cannabis packaging? In 2025, what are we going to be buying cannabis in, cannabis flower in, cannabis products in, both what we want to be buying it in and what maybe the regulations will require us to buy it in, and how does growth in the professionalization, possibly the consolidation of the industry, how will that affect packaging? What do the future holds for packaging at large?
That's a great question.
I hope everyone's using hemp packaging. But I think the reason us as a small packaging company are hopefully getting off the ground here and using the cannabis industry as an avenue to do that is because There is an opportunity for bioplastics. People do want to start using them. I just heard recently that by 2020, bioplastics are going to make up 7% of total plastic being used. So that's a huge impact from where we stand today. And so with that, I hope that the cannabis industry becomes the leader, and then as it grows, these things can transfer over to other industries like the liquor industry or the coffee industry, where we also see single-use plastic packaging waste as probably the biggest issue those industries have for themselves. And so, hopefully the cannabis industry within the next 5 to 10 years can be a leader, because there is this space for so much innovation and branding and all these, people who want cool packaging. And that packaging industry, I think, has been pretty stale for a long time in every industry that it's in. So hopefully cannabis can be a leader in that.
I would think, too, that as cannabis becomes legal in more states, more mainstream, bigger lobbying efforts, consolidation, and once the fear of cannabis goes away, maybe they'll lax up on some of this child-resistant packaging, especially in terms of flour, which quite honestly won't be good for my business, but it'll be great for the environment, and I'm all for it. Because there's really no reason for flour to be in plastic child-resistant packaging, because it can't poison anybody anyway until it's ignited.
Yeah. Well, it can't poison
so when you
anyone
said, because you
anyway,
said 2025, and I'm hoping by 2025, cannabis is taken off Schedule 1, most certainly, and maybe the stigma is kind of taken away, and not such a grave need for child-resistant packaging.
I totally agree with that. I think we'll also be seeing some usage of different materials that are not plastics. So glass containers. I just recently saw a very, very cool child-resistant glass container that was specifically made for cannabis. It's called Pollen Gear is the company, but they're creating some pretty cool looking containers. Also paperboard, especially that's not created 100% from tree sources. And as we both talked about packaging from cannabis waste, I mean, I'd really love to see the full circle of from plant to waste back into packaging. I think that's going to be the future of packaging. And as I said earlier, more involvement and coordination across the supply chain to make sure at every step in the process we are doing whatever we can to reduce, reuse, and recycle.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Hope you enjoyed this conversation about packaging. If you have any questions about packaging, feel free to come and grab any of us. And enjoy the next session, which is going to be starting at around 4, so you have a little bit of time.